All right. Hey, it's on. All right, cool. So, because we have some complicated names on the panel, I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves. So, let's just do a quick intro.
All right. This on? Yep. So, Graham Thompson,
Yes.
Intrinsic Security, Cloud Security guy.
I'm John Weigelt, Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft in Canada, and I'm accountable for the compliance of the Canadian data centers.
Hi, I'm John O'Brien from Communication Security Establishment, a Senior Technical Advisor working on cloud security as well as malware and automation and all things open source. And I'm going to be the argumentative one today. Let's put that hat on.
Hi, my name is Poti Duncan from TBS CIOB Cybersecurity.
Hi, I'm Niels Pullman, former Chief Security Officer and co-founder of the Cloud Security Alliance.
So, the first question, and I didn't want to give you guys a lot of prep because I kind of wanted the answers to be off the cuff, which is why I really dragged sending out the common themes that you're all desperate for. So, what have you guys seen as the main barriers to cloud adoption lately? And anyone, feel free to jump in.
Well, I'll start off. I guess the main barrier is education and awareness. When I started down this path some 8 years ago, when we had the first business case for cloud computing, we thought that people kind of got it and understood hyperscale cloud. I would have never imagined the amount of education and awareness I've had to do over the last 5 years of our teams internally, of our customer space, of the Canadian audit community. I remember having a conversation with an auditor and saying, look, we need your help to get people comfortable with the cloud. And they said, well, we got to come in and we got to audit your sites. We've got 100 sites that we treat as one data center. How long does it take to audit a site visit? 4 days, maybe 8 days? That's 400, 800 days. And we said, so how many of these have you done? We know this shit cold, they said to me. And I was taken aback. And then we took them through and educated and aware and made them more aware of things, and then they finally started to get it. But it's 5 or 7 visits before people really kind of get their head around, this is hyperscale cloud, this is how things are done differently.
Yeah, I've seen personally, this is really awkward. I've seen personally, I think the question is really in Canada. There's a huge culture change or culture difference, if you will, between the United States and Canada. I think Canada is pretty much behind the times, if you will, compared to the United States. And I don't even know, I guess, Niles, you'd know best, if, United States is kind of like the leader, or if it's more in Singapore and places like that are really, really embracing cloud. But I've actually been amazed at the corporations, financial institutions, and so on that are embracing cloud. Even the U.S. government, I mean, they embrace it a whole lot more than we do up here. Anyways, that's my view.
So, what about from the Canadian government side of things? What's the big barrier besides money, which is always the barrier to anything new in government?
So I would argue that money probably isn't the issue here. Coming from CSE and security, obviously, security always says no. That seems to be the message that I hear a lot within the town. I'm here to say that's actually not what we're saying. I actually have really very little concerns with the CSPs at all, to be honest. I'm more concerned with our own government's use of the cloud, right? The people that are going to screw it up, let's be honest, are us, because we haven't used it enough yet, right? So what can CSE do to kind of provide guidance to government and provincial sector and commercial sector to help them do the right thing? I think that's the biggest thing. And again, it comes back to education.
Yeah, and from my perspective, it's definitely the culture and change is scary, right? So now we want to, we've been focused on delivering IT services. We're the best from a government perspective. So now we want to outsource those services to a CSP. So that, is really scary. But instead of, focusing on IT, we need to start focusing on delivering, supporting the business. Like, we're here to support the citizens of Canada, right? And we want to make sure that, start focusing on those, let the CSPs who spend lots of money investing in their infrastructure, obviously they're doing it for their own purposes, for profit, but let's leverage that and let's look at cloud as an opportunity to start building proper services for our Canadians.
Okay. So just a question from the CSE testing perspective. I know, going back over the last 10, 15 years, it was always ship us a box, we'll test it, perform certification and accreditation. How do you do that with a hosted managed service outside of your control? And really be able to advise organizations or departments to use one over the other?
So I would say we're going to stay out of the certification game, to be honest. We are looking at what we can do in the assessment space. So kind of a light touch assessment. We don't want to get to a point where we're reinventing FedRAMP. I don't think anyone benefits from that. We'd like to get to a point where we can actually be quite responsive to the needs of the departments. And that involves trust, right? Like at the end of the day, you're giving your data to someone else. There's a very high degree of trust that you need to have there. What we'd like to do is be able to provide that level of trust to the departments, because we've gone through the efforts with the cloud security providers. We've had those discussions. We've gone past the SOCs and the ISO certifications. We've actually sat down and talked and seen what they're doing in the back end and how their whole framework process will essentially continue being secure. Right? We can assess it right now, but they're shipping out code every day. Right? Like, if we don't trust them to have a verifiable process for releasing good code, then the second after we assess it, it's vulnerable, and what's the point of doing it, right? So.
But all that said, we continue our work with governments to provide access to source code. So the Canadian government has had access to Microsoft source code for the better part of 14 years under the government security program. We continue to provide source code access within our cloud services. And so we have transparency centers around the world where governments can come in and make rest assured that there are no surreptitious access points within our data centers. And you can test the code and you can bring in your own tools, and the tools stay there, and we don't see and overlook what you do. So you have that ability. And actually, each and every one of you in the room has the ability to do pen testing. We've got a bug bounty for Office 365. Find something, get paid, right? You want to do that in Azure and on our infrastructure as a service, bash away, right? Most of the time, we will leave you alone. If it gets too noisy and you start taking down services, well, then there's a bigger problem, but then, we'll work with you.
Please check with your attorney, your legal counsel before going down that road.
So actually, I got a question. Are we allowed to ask each other questions?
Go to town.
All right. So like I know Amazon, for example, probably a bad word, but still. So the Amazon guys, I know when you want to pen test your own server in an Amazon cloud, they make you sign off, and at the very bottom, it says, you accept responsibility for any damage to the AWS infrastructure, and we will sue you type of thing. So does Microsoft do anything like that?
So first off, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. I'd have to take a look. That's the first I've heard of that, right? So we let you pen test and beat up on your own system as much as you want.
All right.
So the fact is that, we do not want to see what's going on in your tenant, right? So we've architected and built our systems so that our engineers don't ever have to get at your tenant. It's your tenant. What you do inside your tenant is your business. We don't want to see it, right? So if you're streaming movies and stuff, unless someone tells us about it, we don't want to see it. So if you're pen testing it, we don't know if you're pen testing it or if it's Pink Monday or Cyber Friday, right? We don't care.
All right, cool.
So, let's see, where do I start? I was silent for a moment, but
You look like the cat that ate the canary
we,
at the end of the table there.
yeah, first of all, I don't want to be seen as representing a certain country here. I see actually the cloud discussion as a very global one that is not just lively in Canada, but in other parts of the world as well. I was just involved in a project where the Indonesian government is thinking of rewriting its privacy policies and laws because they're realizing that, without the cloud, they might not be able to serve 300 million people. So, other countries are struggling with this at all ends of the spectrum. But I think what we see with what cloud probably started in other technological developments like containerizations and apps directly to a NIC and things like that, is a rethinking of security. In the old days, we would, because the life cycles were longer, we would test and verify and audit, and then we would deploy, and then we would actually utilize the deployment, and then we start all over again. And obviously that's not working anymore, right? Like things have gotten way too fast. The average company, I would say in the US, is using between 200 to 300 cloud providers every day to get their business done. So I think we have long left the station of the old security model. Unfortunately, a lot of the tools and the processes that we learned in the early days were built on that model. So now you have to kind of reinvent a lot of things. And, I hear FedRAMP. I mean, let's just be very honest. A lot of that is also still, the old model. we just have to have the courage as a security community to not just catch up, but actually move ahead and do things differently. And just as a reminder, security's job is not to prevent that something bad happens. Our job is to mitigate risks. And perhaps we can like dive a little bit deeper into what that means.
I think one of the things that you see as well is that your cloud providers are moving with that new tempo, right? So security development lifecycle that we've been doing for quite some time, ISO certified, by the way, we've now moved into Agile. And so those of you that are building out in the Agile world can take that advice and guidance and see, what particular elements apply to sprints, what particular elements apply at the beginning, and build those into your own environments. And so there's a lot of advice and guidance out there that will help you make sure that whatever you deploy within the cloud services remains secure and fits with that new tempo.
I'll just kind of tack on one thing on the end there. So what Niels was talking about earlier about mitigating risk, right? We do all this risk mitigation. We assume nothing ever bad is going to happen, right? But like, that doesn't really work, right? We get hacked all the time. We get owned. It happens, right? So one of the things that Microsoft put out a few years ago is this concept of assuming breach, right? And this is something the CSE has been trying to talk about a lot more. You are going to get breached. It's going to happen. So what are you going to do when that happens, right? And generally speaking, that's not something that we're very good at. So I would actually rather we focus on that rather than going through. Things happen, right? So I try not to throw Equifax under the bus too often, but again, it does happen, right? So I know. But as long as it's not me.
But did anybody ask if Equifax was a cloud breach? Take a look back last 18 months and then enumerate all those exploits that happened. Which ones were as a result of cloud? None.
Well, according to one vendor, it was. They said it. They said it. They were full of crap, but they did say that it was cloud.
Right, and so then we go to Argentina and we say the username and passwords of Equifax down.
Yeah. It's the
Yeah.
cloud's fault. It's admin.
Yeah. Baby monitors, iCloud, yeah.
Okay, so, but before we glorify the cloud a little bit, let's just be honest. The cloud has started out with a big promise. I remember the early days when we co-founded the Cloud Security Alliance, like, the cloud will solve all your problems, because there's companies that will do a great job around security and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Well, fast forward to today, that statement might still be true, but what we forgot in the process is how technology always catches up with us, and it has created a highly, highly complex world. I would actually make the argument that today, if you create complex cloud environments involving different vendors, you better have really, really good people that know what they're doing, because it's not easy, right? Don't think just because a big cloud provider with a letter fairly early in the alphabet who has created a nice GUI, that means the rest is easy, whatever is under the hood. It's actually highly complicated where even in the company itself, that provider itself, only a handful of people really understand how it works together. So it's a broken promise of the cloud. I agree with your statement in itself, but you can't look at that statement just in a vacuum.
Yeah, so myself, there's a huge chasm, right? You can have everything from a multi-billion-dollar company. I won't mention the A word, but the Microsofts, the Googles, the Salesforces, and so on. These guys have billions of bucks invested, and then you got two dudes in their basement that can't even afford to do like a SOC 2, and they're saying, "Oh, we'll consume our services." I've had a client who, when assessing a provider, was literally told by their CIO during the interview, "Okay, stop. I'm going to stop you right there. We're 10 guys. We're smart. We all do the right thing. There's your security program," right? So there's got to be a certain amount, at least I think so, there's got to be a certain amount of kind of trust but verify, but not just going in cold and saying, "Okay, well, yeah, it's cloud, so it's going to make everything better." You can really screw up a cloud deployment really, really well. I mean, you could ask companies like Codespaces, for example, that you lose access to your access keys, they're gone. Next thing you know, you're hacked and you're out of business. There's all kinds of ways that the cloud providers might be doing a great job, but it's also our implementations we got to worry about. Anyways.
Well, and that's why we're definitely focusing on, we've been a lot of focus on the CSPs, the security posture of the CSPs, but we need to focus on, providing advice and guidance to departments and agencies to secure their part of the stack. So every time we're issuing a spin on the secure use of commercial cloud services to reiterate the fact that you need to do your part of configuring and securing and monitoring that environment, right? So this is the guidance that we're trying to provide from TBS, working with CSE, SSE, you know, making sure that we put the building blocks in place so that you can do your job securely and protect our citizens' data.
So what do you find thus far, what's the biggest barrier in educating users or getting them to follow suit? Is it more efficient documentation? Is it a better communication method to the individuals that are doing the implementation? What's working and what's not working?
So I think as security people, we are part anthropologists, right? We try to get in the heads of the people that are out there. And so what I see is a lot of anchoring. So cloud's complex. And so when you face with complexity, you go back to something that you knew, and then you try to build out from there. And so I see a lot of people going back, and for me, it's my original server that I got to play with. It was a Sun Solaris 8 box. Remember down on Laurier Street, that was my device. And I was administrator on that, and I could do absolutely everything on that device. And people still have that frame of reference for that's how you administer your servers. When you scale that up to 1 million, you can't do that human-intensive thing anymore. And what people do is they fall back in that frame of reference. And the best metaphor I could come up with is when you look at security controls and safeguards, think about the driverless truck, right? So we see Mercedes-Benz, we see Freightliner coming out with the driverless truck. We have a lot of security practitioners asking for the license of the person behind the wheel. And it's like, hold on a second here. There's nobody behind the wheel. Stop asking for the license. And yet we continue to have security practitioners ask for the license of the person behind the wheel. And it's time we get out of that frame of reference and look at the new frame of reference at the controls and safeguards that are there.
To be fair, I would say patching has gotten a little bit better since the Solaris 8 days. So
A little bit.
that's an innovation. So what about in government? Like how do you communicate to end users and implementers? Or is
So-
that the $500 million a year
Yeah, it's a
contract
question.
to answer?
Honestly, I think everything comes back to trust, right? So, as Niels was saying, the cloud is complex, right? Some of the guidance we used to issue was about the concept of separating your operational network from your management networks, right? So people will take that and they'll go into the cloud and they'll create a VM with two NICs, two physical NICs, but they both go back down to the same software-defined network at the end, right? So really, it doesn't make a difference, right? People need to start understanding how these clouds are architected, or someone else does, and they need to trust those people, and that's kind of what CSE is trying to provide. It's really complex, but when you break it down into those low-level things, there's very specific areas where there's actual concerns, and that's where we want people to focus on. Right? Again, I can't go out and I can't make the departments more secure if they're going out and they're not using multi-factor authentication, if they're using their personal laptop and they're browsing the web and then they're managing their service. Like these are, behaviors that are just not beneficial to us, right? So until people understand that it's different and that they have to change the way they do things, I think people are just afraid. Yeah.
I think it's also important to give our departments and agencies the right tools, right? We should be able to give them tools that are sort of RGC approved, so they can just spin up their environments and focus on, the things that they need to focus on. And then automate all of that so that, really take the power of cloud computing, so they can focus on delivering, their services. But we need to do a better job, like communicating with the community to give them those tools, making, like having a centralized collaboration tool where everybody can share all their templates. That's something that we want to set up. So I think it's just reaching out to that, the community.
I think just kind of one other thing to throw in there. Within the government, we're big, we're slow. That's just kind of how we roll, right? I would argue that we haven't really given people an ability to try things, to innovate, right? So there's no real safe place for them to go and to screw up. And we assume that people are just going to get it right the first time. That doesn't really ever happen, right? So we need to kind of create these spaces where people can go out into the cloud, they can deploy some stuff, they can get, owned with very little damage to anything, right? Like it's just a learning curve, right? People have to go through that space. So if we can do that and help them speed them along that curve, then ideally when they go and they deploy services that has, Canadian citizens' data in there, then we don't have to worry about that anymore because they've failed in a much safer environment.
So another barrier I do find is the procurement aspect. We don't have procurement vehicles that will allow departments to, spin up a cloud service. we're trying to solve that. We're started issuing contracts to some of the CSPs for an unclassified workloads, but the sweet spot is protected B. So, my boss is basically saying, how fast can we get to protected B? So I can give you all the tools, all the building blocks to get there, but then there's this whole procurement process that still follows that traditional approach. So we're trying to address that, and I don't want to spend another year before we get PB cloud services.
And do you see that as a detriment to attracting top talent? Because I know that's always been an issue with a government role, is enticing fresh out of school students to come in who want to use the latest and greatest technology and architecture models, and then they're told, well, no, you're going to be developing for Windows 2008 server, and that's it, because that's all we're supporting for the next couple of years.
It's definitely really hard to find good resources, yes. Yeah.
Speaking from CSE again, like we hire people and then we take their phones away, right? So we actually make it really hard to bring people
So
in the
they
door.
can't quit because you're holding their phones?
Yeah, you work for me forever, right? That's kind of my retention strategy. No, but it's, I mean, again, so classified environment, obviously we have some challenges in our hiring respect. That being said, I would argue the CSE is probably one of the more forward-leaning organizations in terms of the technology that we use, simply because we don't really have an option to fail, right? Like when we fail, that's bad for the government, right? It doesn't end well, it gets onto the news. So we actually push the limit in terms of technology quite rapidly. Unfortunately, again, because most of the stuff we do is sensitive, we don't get to play with the cloud as much as we would like to, right? So we've started working on some projects where we do have the ability to go out into the cloud. And I'll do a shameless pitch, come to my talk tomorrow morning, where we'll talk about some of the stuff we're doing that kind of makes it more appealing to people that are used to working open source space, working with cloud, working with Python, just new tools, new tech. It should be fun to work for the government, right?
It should be.
Should
You're
be.
right.
It should be good.
I'm sure everyone who's ever worked in the government has said that. It should be fun working here.
We can get there. Like we can actually do that. That is a solvable problem. Stance.
So I would say that, so I've been talking about cloud for probably 7, 8 years, not as long as some or most. But I remember when the term cloud security started popping up with more frequency, and there was immediate draw to, oh, that means encryption. So at what point do we get, so I think we've passed that security in cloud environments is not just encryption in transit or on disk. Do we know that the consumers of cloud infrastructure and architecture know that the cloud provider is no longer providing them with the security they thought they had 6 years ago when they signed up? Or to better rephrase it, do we think that the users are aware of the security tools and the methods to which they should be configured in cloud environments? Or are we still a little ways out on that?
I think we're still a ways out on that. And so you saw that one of the other guys was quoted in a magazine and saying, that's not us, that's your guys' responsibility. We set it up and you gotta enable these things. And so, the way we portray it, it's a shared responsibility, right? We share the responsibility for security with you guys. So we provide you the capabilities. If you need PCI, you gotta turn on PCI. Sorry, but that's just the way that it is. But we do provide new capabilities. And so encryption's still there. And we're seeing increased encryption, right? So we've got hardware-based confidential computing, right? Brought to you by Intel, right in the hardware. So we start to see new features brought out all the time, but it's not all encryption, right? And so there's other places where it's role-based access control, or it's data minimization, or it's least privilege. There's all these different controls. We track over 2,000 controls. And someone challenged me. They said, John, insider threat. You need to tell us how many controls are there to prevent the insider threat. And so I went through them. And there were over 1,800 controls that prevent the insider threat, because they're all intermixed, and it's a different philosophy of how we do things. We've got to prevent the next Snowden from happening, and we put in controls to prevent that. So the question I ask all of you is, do you do that in your environment? What controls and compensating controls have you put in place for that insider or colluding insiders?
So if you look at technology overall, I think one thing that cloud computing has started, not completely responsible for, but sure, a trend it has started. I look at tech in the private sector and also in the government kind of as a rubber band. In the old days, it was tight, but it was okay. We have stretched it out so far, but it's ready to snap. And what do I mean by that is A lot of cloud providers have built their controls, their frameworks for the top end of that rubber band. The most sophisticated companies, Fortune 500s, you know, the people that can attract and pay the talent. But then we have all the rest behind. And all they see all day long is that security has gotten so complex that their head is ready to explode. If they read in the news that Estonia is revoking all smart cards because it can no longer be trusted, or Equifax just lost every frickin' American's ID, and then somebody comes to them as a salesperson and say, oh, just ignore this, you can trust us, like we are a great cloud provider, right? How do they know? How do they even know the difference, right? They don't. We have left them behind. And while it is great that you have, you know, thousands of controls, but to your medium-sized business that has, like, let's say 500 to 1,000 employees, they don't know what that means. Have you made it easier for them? Have you made it easier for some government agencies to trust and utilize something they fully understand? No, I think we have completely, utterly failed as an industry because we only focus on the top end of everything. Top end of everything. And we leave everyone else behind. And I worry that this is actually going to get worse. We're going to stretch this band more and more until it snaps and we leave a lot of people all behind.
I have to fundamentally disagree with that, right? So when I look at the Canadian marketplace and look at Canadian small business, well, Canada is made up of small businesses, right? Over 1 million businesses in Canada. And a lot of them have a passion in their business. Carpenters, plumbers, group homeowners. And they've got a server under their desk or they got a PC under their desk. How much time do you think they spend securing that PC under their desk? Probably zero. I know myself, whenever I go to a dinner party, guess what? I'm tech support. And I go in and I clean them up and I fix them up and get them to where they're at, but that's all that I can do for that time. Maybe I come back with a complimentary version of Windows 10 and upgrade them, but you know, and I don't need to go to your dinner party. So moving those people to the cloud.
What a guest. That'd be
To
great.
software as a service will raise the bar, right? Earlier, thank you. Earlier, we heard from Shopify, right? Shopify, 500,000 businesses moving their e-commerce to their cloud type services, right? I would argue that the cloud is moving the bar, and raising the bar of assurance, right? And it's simplifying it. We don't have to go through 90 pages from Public Safety Canada around firewalls on your point of sale terminal, blah, blah, blah. Buy the service, highly paid individuals that will make sure that it's secured. And you've got a legal agreement that's there as well that will protect you as well, right? So I would argue that the cloud is actually helping a great deal of those people. I'm not suggesting that the 2,000 controls that we put in our system, you have to enable all of them. No, those are the things that we do. There's other controls that you can do, but we handle 2,000 of them. We spend $1 billion a year on security. We make sure that this stuff is secure. You only got one chance to get it right. So I disagree fundamentally with that.
Yeah, do you want? No, cool.
No.
All right. All right, so
I'm fine with him disagreeing.
there's like I'm seeing kind of like a major disconnect though, because you got the provider side, yeah, and that's cool, right? They got to do what they do and they spend the money and yeah, that's rock solid. I have no reason to doubt it. But when a company loses 12 million records or 100 million records because they forgot to click a box that says, oh, everyone should not have read control to this S3 share, you know that there's a lot that's going to be on the client themselves. And one of those organizations, I heard the exact term, don't bore us with basics. We want to talk about like AES encryption in detail, but we're going to leave everybody have read access on the internet to all these records, right? So there is that kind of disconnect, like what you were talking about with the whole, you know, you're really kind of focusing on all this, the really cool tech, but all the checks and controls for all the basics, if you will, aren't really being done.
But that's not cloud. That's not a problem just for
but
cloud.
that's the problem
across
now.
it. Like how many
Yeah.
people are doing the CSE top 10? Modern systems, keeping them up to date, passwords and education awareness. Just do 4 of them, right?
Basic hygiene, difficult.
Basic hygiene. That's not a cloud issue.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, it's not. But the problem is, it's more like a understanding of what this cloud thing is, right? People are like, oh, well, they're gonna take, you know, there's gonna be cloud fairy dust, and my server's gonna be awesome, and it's gonna be automatic redundancy, and automatic high availability, and all this stuff. It's just not true. You have to architect for it. If your apps don't do it, cloud won't do it for you. And there's that disconnect, I find, just in general public.
Sure.
So this is pretty
Very
much a room of
justice,
security professionals. I'm going to get some audience participation. How many of you use two-factor authentication to access your email? So the fact that not all of you are raising your hand is a problem, right? If we can't figure it out, why do we expect anyone else to figure it out? We can do better.
I'm trying to be political correct here, but perhaps
That's okay.
I should stop. Don't hold back. So I'm not making cloud responsible for people having lost touch with the complexity of technology. I'm not saying this, but what I'm saying is we have basically given everyone a chance to drive a 2-ton truck with only 1 week of training, whereas before you had to study for a year. How hard was it in the old days to create a startup with 10,000 servers? It was freaking hard. You needed to have people that really know their shit. Sorry, I'm being very blunt here. How hard is it today? It takes a swipe of a credit card. Okay, so I have just given somebody 10,000 machines if they can pay for it. And what's the worst is not just what's the damage they create for themselves and their customers. No, what happens if somebody else gets a hold of these 10,000 machines? Oh boy, I can do fun stuff on the internet with it, right? So the implications of these massive infrastructures are not clear. You know, I was in charge of security of a company that was once Amazon's largest customers. Oops, I said the name. With close to 100,000 servers, right? Where you have developers, I mean, pushing code literally every hour. There is no way you can be in control of everything. It's impossible. So what you need is a big team of security professionals who really know their stuff and literally chasing things every minute, every minute. How many companies can do that? How hard is it these days to get 100,000 servers if you have a credit card that has enough money on it? It's not, right? So my point is what cloud has done, it has enabled people to do stuff that they shouldn't be doing because they either don't have a talent or the experience or care or they understand what type of vehicle, how big that gun is that we have just given them access to.
To further on that point, I was at AWS reInvent last year, and I was really curious about the partnership between VMware and AWS. And they actually demoed a way to use an Amazon Echo via voice command to spin up 10,000 servers. And it was as simple as, Alexa, create 10,000 servers. Okay, I'm creating 10,000 servers. So that worries me quite a bit because I always think of, okay, well, the cloud administrator comes home after a hard night of drinking and says, hey, watch what I can do. Delete all servers.
So maybe we don't focus on IaaS, we focus on using SaaS services, where a lot of the stack is taken care of by the CSPs. We focus on, the data layer, the user access layer.
And how do we do that?
We need guidance, and that's the support that's the stuff that we need to provide to our departments, and we're actively working on providing guidance or developing guidance to help our community.
And I think we have to be careful not to overblow this idea that there's no governance associated with your use of the cloud, right? So certainly I can swipe my credit card and get myself a whole bunch of Azure and be very, very dangerous because that's been a while since I've coded. So yeah, I could do that. But then I look at the governance model and say, okay, so if I'm on CorpNet on my internal network and I try to spin up Azure, they're going to say, well, hold on a second, John. You're not authorized to do that. And if you are, well, here's a pattern that we're going to give you. And you start off with this pattern, and it's going to be resource manager. It's going to have IDS, IPS, and it's going to be connected to the environment. It's going to have certain constraints. And it's going to say, okay, that you're allowed to have this target. And then if you get bigger, then you have to get authorization to get bigger than that. So to suggest there's no governance there and it's just going to explode and you get 100 million machines, it's one end of that elastic band perhaps. But practically speaking, organizations don't do that.
And why don't they do it?
Because it costs them money, right? It comes down to, okay, how do I manage my tenancy? How do I manage the use of my consumption of this stuff? Because I don't want it to explode. And then they work with the cloud service providers to say, okay, you know what? We want you to monitor kind of the normal care and feeding of this thing and you want you to report on it. And guess what? We do that. We report on that and say, hey, you know what? Domino's Pizza, you've been running so many pizzas through your place every day except Super Bowl day. On that Super Bowl day, we're saying, hey, you're using a lot of cloud. Do you know how to do this? They go, damn right we want to.
So two things here. One is it's long known that especially infrastructure as a service providers factor in a lot of in their pricing unused resources, meaning you bought more than you actually use. That's part of a pricing model. So I wouldn't say that we have completely figured out, a perfect governance model. And number two, even if you and that other big, infrastructure as a service company do it perfectly, remember we are talking about an ecosystem.
Understand.
And I can get, if you don't take my money, I can get 10,000 servers spun up in the Netherlands without any government governance around it. And guess what? It's the internet, so it doesn't really matter, right? So we have to look at this as a whole ecosystem. And just because 2, 3, 4, 5 companies are doing an awesome job doesn't mean the rest is. And that's my biggest gripe. Like somebody said earlier, I can be 10 guys in a garage company and make myself look pretty cool, but I don't know anything about security. In fact, I give you an example. I had a conversation with a fairly large backup provider, fairly large cloud company. And after half an hour with the top sales guy for enterprises in the US, trying to explain to me how their security model works, which was, by the way, completely incorrect, not understanding even how the encryption model works, to the point where I had to reach out to the CTO, because I know him actually, and say, you know what, this is what one of your top salespeople told me. He was embarrassed. Well, the guy was let go. But how frightening for a normal consumer, an enterprise, to listen to a person like this, if their own salespeople don't know their stuff, right? And you don't have somebody sitting on the other side that can question this because they understand more about security than a salesperson, then most likely a lot of people would just say, yeah, sure, that sounds good. I'll sign up. Send me the documents. That's my gripe. We have lost touch with the ability of the regular customer, enterprise customer government, to really ask and push a lot of these providers, not the top tier providers, but a lot of these others. Right? If you know that 300 cloud providers are used on an average day in the US by a regular company, how many of them are top tier? 5, 10? Let it be 50. That's 250 other cloud providers that don't know what they're doing. That's scary. And the interdependency, by the way, between these cloud providers is another problem we probably need to address.
But again, we're talking general security challenges, right? So, let's rewind and go back before cloud and how many snake oil salesmen were out there selling, other security products. Encryption that doesn't work. Using the same key across a variety of different things, like one key so that you can still search on it. Hold on a second here, I can still search on it? That's not very helpful, right? So we've faced that time immemorial around these types of solutions. The great news is we've got certification regimes. We've got ways to look at the safeguards. We've got ways to look at the controls. We as security professionals have to arm ourselves to understand those. Take the SOC 2 report. Don't just look at the check boxes. Look at the system description. Look at the system security plan. Yes, I know FedRAMP doesn't apply in Canada, but the system security plan is pretty cool. Talks a lot about the controls that are there. We as security professionals read those suckers. And if you don't get those from your cloud service provider, then ask for them. And then if they don't have them, then maybe they're one of those 300. That's not the one that you want to go with. But this is the same security challenge, just in a different context. And so let's not paint the cloud with it.
The scale is just a little different.
Yeah, that's actually, it's pretty funny, as I just noticed, like, we've been here for 40 minutes, and SaaS has been mentioned once. And yet, I think across the board, if you look at all enterprises, maybe they're doing, multi-cloud, whatever, but they've got, let's say, AWS, and they're using Azure or whatever. But then they've got, as you were saying, like 300 SaaS providers. They got all this data out all over the place. And again, it's 2 dudes in their basement who spun something up. And we got vendor failures need to worry about, security controls, all that stuff. And I just find it funny how SaaS is always, when it comes to cloud, because we're all tech people, it's always about IaaS. And yet from the business side, business people look at it and say, oh, well, SaaS, no, it's okay, they're cloud, they're true pros. Well, maybe they don't, maybe they really suck. And you don't know about it until you actually investigate, but nobody investigates because it's that culture thing again.
And I wonder if that is also a scale issue, because there are so many SaaS providers compared to infrastructure as a service providers. and I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, I think, like you said, anyone can spin up their own. So I live in the Bay Area, and if you go to Starbucks for 5 minutes, you'll hear 3 or 4 pitches for the next Twitter or the next Facebook.
So Silicon Valley, the show, is actually true.
It is extremely true. If you watch it, it is exactly like that. And it's, you know, anyone can start their own company while still working 2 or 3 jobs anyway. So I personally think the idea of SaaS security is ultimately going to be dictated by the customer base that they draw in and who's paying for
Yeah.
it.
All right, so we got 20 minutes. I'd love to have like a whole talk about that. It could, like Mark Anderson saying, you know, raise prices, because all these guys are charging $29 for someone's gonna, like Movie Pass, but anyways, that's a whole other story. We make it up on volume, losing $40 per person a month. Anyways, so the business models are kind of messed up. And in the guidance, the CSA guidance, which by the way is fantastic, 4.0's out. If you haven't seen it yet, you definitely should download it. I'm not getting paid for that, by the way. It's free download. So in 3.0, they had a cloud taxonomy that basically listed out a whole bunch of cloud service providers. I actually went through it. I was bored one day. I'm kind of a nerd that way. And 48% of those companies are out of business now. One of them, if you want to buy Chinese Propecia, you can buy it from a former cloud service provider. I guess they pivoted their business model.
And how did you find that exactly?
Just by going site to site to site to site.
It's just a
Going,
random search on Google?
yeah, no. It was through the cloud taxonomy, so looking at every single one, following it up. And the Propecia actually wasn't all that bad. It was, yeah.
And that's why I have eyebrows. So I want to ask something that kind of came up when we were emailing back and forth. Why don't we have a FedRAMP?
Oh,
equivalent?
Jesus. Sorry, I didn't bring it up.
So this is where I throw my smoke bomb down and then run out the back door.
Ninja tools.
So we don't necessarily think that's the best way to go right now. Like I said earlier, we are looking at doing an assessment process. We'd like to get something that's a bit lighter than FedRAMP. And having just gone through the FedRAMP Accelerated last night, we're still talking 6 months and $1 million. Like, that's a lot of money, right? It's not a lot of money for John necessarily, but it might be a lot of money for
Yeah, just,
But
it's the
John
CSP
Proper.
paying for that, right?
Exactly,
It's not
right?
the government.
And I mean, government of Canada, like you said, Canada's built up off small, medium businesses, right? So if we're essentially requiring that level of buy-in for any, you know, small startup in the garage, well, I'd argue that's not necessarily the best for the Canadian economy. That being said, can we get enough of an assurance from the assessments that we do based on existing assessments that have been done, certifications, based on existing trust relationships we have with the vendors through personal discussions? Is that enough? Right? That's the thing. There's a quote that I like to steal from the UK. It's user experience has to be fantastic. Security needs to be good enough. Right? And we always kind of default to security needs to be perfect. Security is never going to be perfect. Let's be honest, right? So what is that happy medium? And that's what we're trying to do right now.
Yeah, I think the power that, I mean, the Canadian government could really leverage is just the reuse model, right? One department has taken it, they've accepted the risk. The other ones can accept the risk on their own, saying that, well, these guys have already done it, and then really kind of accelerate that adoption, because otherwise it's going to be shadow IT.
I was going to say, so we did actually look at CANRAMP back in 2015. So there was a cloud RFI that was issued to the vendor community, and all the vendors came back with some outliers basically saying, don't do CANRAMP. And they recommended following and using industry certifications, right? So they don't want to follow, they don't want to comply to yet another compliance regime. But from a reuse perspective, we actually do reuse a lot of FedRAMP materials. We just don't promote a CANRAMP approach, right? So we're looking. So if we published the GC Cloud Security Control Profile for PBMM. You know, in the annex, it's all the controls are you know, there's a column for CSPs, and that's basically, you know, leveraging the FedRAMP Cloud moderate profile. And those controls are actually cross-referenced to the industry standards like ISO, SOX, even CSA's, CCM. So we want to reuse what's available. We don't want to reinvent a new program just from a compliance perspective, following the old traditional approach of CNA.
And we've actually gone through the control profile that Treasury Board published and our existing controls. We had a local Canadian audit firm go through and do an audit opinion. So this is not an assessment, it's a formal audit opinion, and highlight where there were differences. And for the most part, the differences were simply where the Treasury Board standard calls for Treasury Board approved crypto, and our FedRAMP certification says AES 256. Well, if you follow the trail from Treasury Board through CSE to AES 256, then you see there's an equivalence, but that's basically a difference that's there. And that's helped departments do their threat risk assessment on that. And then part of the unique Canadian side of the house is to do the privacy impact assessment. So we've got foundational privacy impact assessments that help take departments 90% of the way to do their own privacy impact assessment. And we had one agency come back and say, look, it saved us 6 months of time because we had this foundational document that described the privacy of your environment. So that reuse is critically important to be getting those cloud services quickly and easily available to the constituents.
So I want to give ample time for any questions people may have. Yes, sir.
I think, do you mean the STAR program?
Yeah, there's 3 levels.
Yeah.
Last time I checked, only a few vendors, none of the big ones were at the first start. So what prevents us from actually asking them to go to the start level and then public will know structure? I think that one of the requirements was to publicly present an evidence versus the same market. Am I correct?
Perhaps I can give you an answer that is a little broader but might satisfy what you're after. So security and transparency for providers have never been best friends. When the whole idea came out with CSA, I was actually a proponent, and I said, what about if we could get everyone in the industry to agree to be more forthcoming and transparent about what you actually do around security? Because the whole principle of like, I'm not going to tell you and therefore I'm secure, that's long gone, right? And you would be surprised at the pushback from vendors. No, we normally only disclose this stuff with NDAs, and this is really secret. We can't tell everyone what we do around security, which of course is for the most part bullshit, right? You should be able to talk about what you do and how you do it. The reason you don't see a lot in, and I'm just saying this in general, not CSA specific, in these type of efforts to create more transparency is simply because some don't want to play along. And this actually leads me to, somebody mentioned earlier, more innovation, more playing with new things in government, but any effort that can be done to, and I'm calling upon the large cloud providers to, that can be done to make more transparent to customers what is really done, will more or less create a market force for the smaller 2-10 guys in a garage to do the same. Because if you create, I always compare to, I don't know if you have this here in Canada, but in the US, many, many years ago, they created provisions that electrical appliances need to be honest and show to the consumer how much energy they're using. It was a highly effective program because every fridge you would buy, you could no longer hide and say, I only cost $100, but I'm using so much electricity that you're going to pay for the rest, you know, out of electricity costs. We need something like this for providers where everyone comes clean. Here's what we do and how we do it. I hope that kind of a little bit answers.
So I would argue that, yes, here, right? So fully support that. You know, there's a simple URL, servicetrust.microsoft.com. Over 100 different documents there, white papers, all our compliance reports, our FedRAMP system security plan, 700 glorious pages of controls, not only the what we do, but the how we do it. And we describe it in gory detail. So you have that all available to you, all those controls that we have that go against HIPAA, that go against SOC 2, that go against ISO 27001, 27017, 27018, across Azure services, across Office 365 services, across Dynamics services. There's enough reading material there to keep you sleeping for a year and a half.
Karim will be doing
When-
a selected reading tonight during the party.
So we encourage, You'll find though, however, that not everybody does the same, right? And so we encourage everybody to do that. The other thing that we're actively, very, very actively fighting for is more transparency, right? This is a new world where you're relying upon us for your services. We're shoulder to shoulder with you. We've transformed as a company to make sure that you're successful with the use of the cloud. We need to be able to have more transparency. We're suing governments to have more transparency. We're leading the legislative change so that we change dated laws that don't work in the world of cloud, so that we have something that's reasonable. That's why we put data centers in Canada, because we see that data should be governed by the nation where it resides, and we're fighting actively to do that. And so here, let's move towards more transparency. Let's move towards sharing more of what we're doing.
Just going to answer. All right. So your question was about the STAR registry for Cloud Security Alliance and how there's like the self-attestation and there's the certified status. Certified status requires ISO 27001 being extended into the cloud service environment. So for that reason, you're not going to see a whole whack load of certified because in the United States and in Canada, ISO adoption isn't as big as it is over in Europe and Japan and so on.
That's not true.
Yeah, it
We
is.
adopted ISO 27001 and SOC 2 reports as part of our on-class
Oh,
procurement.
no, I
Those
wasn't
are the
talking about
same.
you. No, I was saying, no, he was just, the question was about CCM certification
Okay, I'm
levels. Yeah, and so for a CSP to become CSA certified,
okay.
they need to have ISO
So we are
27000.
leveraging those certifications to provide us assurance that the CSPs are doing their part of the stack.
Yeah, and that if it were a qualification that your provider became certified, they'd have to have ISO to get there, instead of doing a self-assessment. That's,
Which is not an inexpensive
Which
road
is-
to go down.
and again, how important is it for you to sell it?
So one more question, so make it a juicy one.
Who's got a really controversial question?
Oh, here it comes. Here it comes.
I think you had your hand up first, sir.
Do you think the industry as a whole is going to address the time we lost by denying that cloud was coming for the last 7 years?
So I've given a lot of thought to the changing role of the security practitioner. Because, often we talk about the normal administrator and the developers and how their role have changed, but we've kind of forgotten about the administrator. And so my view of utopia for the cloud, and we're not there yet, but my view of utopia is that, we get rid of the noise, right? So there's a ton of noise out there. And, those of us that have cut our teeth on snort and shadow logs, we can run in the morning and we say, so who was knocking on the door last night? And is there anything interesting? A lot of it's noise. We spend a lot of time on the noise. If we can let our cloud provider do the noise, we just check in on them. Hey, how's, brand X doing and getting rid of the noise? Then we can focus on the low and the slow stuff. We can focus on the really nefarious stuff that's going after our business logic. And that's where I think the security people can go.
All right, thank you very much. Let's give the panelists a nice round of applause. They were very good sports.